My company went bankrupt because of a lawsuit I never saw coming. I stood on my son's porch, the man I raised single-handedly asking for a place to sleep for just 2 weeks. He looked at me, handed me $200 and said, "Dad, you should find somewhere else to live." So I left. I thought my life was over. But that very night I received a call from a stranger, a billionaire who told me the lawsuit was no accident. The rain was cold, not merely a chill. This was the kind of deep bone-settling freeze that burrows into your joints when you're 71 years old and have run out of places to turn. I stood there trembling in a suit that had once cost real money, but was now nothing more than soaked wool reeking of soggy failure. My fingers were wrapped tight around the handles of 2 battered duffel bags. That was all I had left. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories, a place where the truth always finds its way to the surface. If stories like this one speak to you, stay close and follow along, so you never miss what comes next. Before we go any further, I'd love to know, where are you listening from today, and what time is it where you are? There's something about hearing a story of loyalty and betrayal that feels different depending on where you sit in the world. A quick note, some elements of this story have been shaped for the purposes of storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is entirely coincidental. What matters most is the truth at the heart of it. That was the full measure of my life. 40 years of blood, sweat, and diesel fumes. 40 years of building Nolan Logistics from a single beat-up van into a fleet that crossed state lines. And now, it all fit into 2 battered duffel bags and a canvas tote bag slung over my shoulder. I looked up at the house. It was a sprawling colonial in the finest part of Charlotte. I knew that brickwork well. I knew that custom mahogany front door well. I wrote the check for the down payment 5 years ago. I remembered signing it, feeling a surge of pride that I could give my son Devin, the kind of start in life I never had myself. I came up in a shack with a tin roof. He started in a mansion. That was the dream, wasn't it? To lift the next generation onto your shoulders so they could see further. But standing there with rain trickling off my hat, brim and down the back of my collar, I understood I wasn't standing on any foundation anymore. I was standing in the mud. I raised my hand to knock. It trembled, not from the cold, from the shame. A man like me, a man who once commanded boardrooms and sat across tables from union negotiators, had no business knocking on a door as a supplicant. I hesitated. My pride howled at me to turn around to sleep on a park bench before I stooped to begging. But then a gust of wind nearly took me off my feet, and reality reasserted itself. The bank had seized the penthouse. The cars were gone. My accounts were frozen pending the investigation. I had $60 in my pocket. I knocked. 3 hard raps against the wood. I waited. Through the door, I could make out the warm amber glow of the interior lights. I could hear faint music, something classical, something refined. It sounded like peace. It sounded like home. The lock clicked. The heavy door swung open. Devin stood there, my boy. He had on a merino wool pullover and was holding a glass of bourbon. He looked at me, and for just a heartbeat, I caught a glimpse of the toddler I used to carry on my shoulders at the rail yard. Then I saw the man he had become. His eyes didn't brighten. They didn't flood with worry. They cut left and right, scanning the long driveway, checking whether the neighbors could see the drenched old man on his front step. He did not move aside. He did not say, "Come in, Dad, get out of the rain." He just stood there filling the doorway, sealing off the warmth. "Dad," he said. The word landed heavy like a charge being read aloud. "What are you doing here? It is late." I swallowed hard against the tightness in my throat. "Devin," I said, my voice cracking more than I'd have liked. "They came today, the marshals. They put the padlock on the apartment. I have nowhere to go, son. Just a week or 2 until I can sort out the legal appeal. Until I can get to my pension." Devin shifted his weight. He raised his glass and took a slow sip, his gaze drifting over my shoulder toward the dark street. I watched him hesitate. I could see the war playing out behind his eyes. He knew everything he had came from me. He knew this house was mine in everything but name. And then she materialized. Renata, my daughter-in-law. She stepped up behind him, looping her manicured arm around his waist, her sharp chin settling onto his shoulder. She had on a silk robe that probably cost more than my first truck. She looked at me, not with pity, but the way someone looks at a stray that has wandered onto a freshly trimmed lawn, disgust seasoned with irritation. "Oh, Clifford," she said. Her voice was breezy, effortless, stripped clean of any warmth. "You are dripping everywhere. I am sorry, Renata." I said, drawing myself up as straight as I could manage. "It is pouring out here." "Devin, honey," she murmured, but it was a stage whisper engineered for my ears. "The Persian rug in the foyer, we just had it cleaned. If he comes inside the smell of wet wool, the smell of the street will work its way into the fibers." I felt the heat rise in my face, the smell of the street. I was wearing a suit I had bought for a shareholders meeting. I was Clifford Nolan. I was not some vagrant off the road. "Renata," I said, meeting her eyes, "I am your father-in-law. I am not asking to sleep on your rug. I am asking for the guest room, the one in the basement. I will stay out of your way." She tightened her hold on Devin. She stopped looking at me altogether. Her gaze fixed on her husband, eyes narrowing to a fine point. "Devin, we talked about this. We need our space. You know how stretched I have been with the charity gala. House guests right now, it is simply not workable. It puts too much strain on our marriage." Devin looked at her. Then he looked at me. I could see the precise moment the choice was made. I could see the spine I thought I had put in him go slack. "Dad," he said, his voice firmer now, fortified by her coldness. "Renata is right. The timing is bad. We have guests coming this weekend. The house is full." "The house is full," I repeated slowly. "It is 6,000 square feet, Devin. 5 bedrooms, just the two of you living here. It is not about the square footage, Dad." He snapped, his guilt curdling into anger. "It is about the dynamic. We are trying to build something here. We cannot put everything on hold because you lost control of your business." It felt like a slap across the face. Lost control. I was sued over a safety violation I never committed. A truck accident I had no part in. I fought it, but the evidence had been stacked against me almost as if it had been constructed. "So, that is it," I said, water dripping from the end of my nose. "You are turning me away." Devin exhaled. He set his glass down on the entry table, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, some sleek leather thing. He flipped it open. I watched his hands that had never known a day of hard labor, because I made sure they wouldn't fumble with the bills. He pulled out a handful of cash 20s, a 10. Someone's. He bunched them in his fist and pushed them at me. "Here," he said. "There is about $200 here." I stared at the money. I did not raise my hand to take it. "Take it, Dad," he pressed, nudging it toward my chest. "Look, there are motels on the south side or the shelter on 7th Street. They are decent. It is just for a few days, right? You said you would figure it out. You are a survivor, Dad. You always figure it out." The south side. The place I had spent 40 years clawing us out of. He was sending me back there and paying me $200 to vanish quietly. Renata peered over his shoulder once more. "You should hurry, Clifford," she said. "The forecast says the storm is getting worse." And really, Devin closed the door. "You are letting the air conditioning out." I looked at the money in his outstretched hand. Then I looked at his face. I wanted to grab him by the collar and shake him until he remembered who had paid for the roof above his head, who had covered the college degree framed in his office, who had funded the wedding, where he swore to protect his family. But I didn't. I am 71 years old. I don't scream. I don't beg. I reached out, but not to take the money. I knocked his hand aside. The bills tumbled down, scattered across the wet porch. The face of Abraham Lincoln on a $5 bill soaked up the muddy water. "I don't want your money, Devin," I said. My voice was low, barely carrying over the sound of the rain, but I watched him flinch. "Keep it. You may need it when your conscience finally wakes up." I turned around. I took hold of my 2 battered duffel bags. My knuckles went white. "Dad, wait!" Devin called out. But he did not step onto the porch. He did not step into the rain. I didn't look back. I made my way down the long, winding driveway. The bags dragged at my arms with every step, the wet pavement a cold, hollow companion. Behind me came the heavy thud of the door swinging shut. Then the sharp, deliberate click of the deadbolt sliding home. They locked it. They locked me out. I kept walking. I walked until the lights of the colonial mansion dissolved behind me in the dark. I walked until my shoes were soaked through and my socks sloshed with every step. I was alone. I was bankrupt. My own family had tossed me aside like furniture too worn to keep. I finally ducked into a bus shelter just to get a moment out of the downpour. I sat down on the metal bench, the cold bleeding through my soaked trousers. I put my head in my hands. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely completely broken. I had weathered strikes, recessions, and courtrooms, but nothing had prepared me for this, the wholesale abandonment by my own blood. I sat there a full hour watching headlights spray arcs of water across the road, wondering if this was how it all ended. Clifford Nolan, dying of pneumonia on a bus bench. Then my phone went off in my coat pocket. I nearly left it. What was waiting for me on the other end? Bill collectors, attorneys, looking to squeeze what wasn't there. I fished it out. The screen had been cracked since I fumbled it on the courthouse steps. Unknown number, nothing attached to it. I held it there, watching it light up. Ring after ring. Habit won out. I answered. "Hello." The word came out, rough scraped raw. A voice on the line asked for Clifford, low-graveled, the kind of voice that fills a room without raising itself. Unfamiliar, but something in it pulled at me. I said, "Who is this? I've got no money for collectors, if that's what this is." "Not a collector," the voice said. "An investor. And I'm aware you are no longer sleeping under your son's roof." Something tightened in my chest. "How could you possibly know that I've had my eye on you, Clifford, since before the verdict came down? I know those brakes weren't touched by your hand. Somebody built that case around you." I pushed to my feet, turning in a slow circle, scanning the empty street. "Who are you?" "The name is Augustin Croft," the man said. The ground shifted under me. Augustin Croft, real estate, billionaire, the man whose fingerprints were on half the city's skyline. 20 years back, we had fought over the same land contracts. He was not a man who played softly. "Why are you calling me Croft?" I said. "We have never been friends." "Correct," Croft said. "But we have a shared enemy. You haven't figured that out yet. Turn your head to the left." I did. A black Rolls-Royce idled at the curb, the windows so deeply tinted they swallowed the light entirely. The rear door opened on its own. "Get in," Clifford Croft said through the phone. "You're soaked through. You're burning with anger. And there is nothing standing between you and zero. I am offering you something. And what I'm offering is worth considerably more than the $200 your boy just tried to press into your hand." I looked at the car, then I looked toward the direction of my son's house one last time. No home, no family, nothing resembling dignity. I ended the call. I picked up my bags and got into that car. I couldn't have known it at the time, but when that heavy door sealed itself shut behind me and the rain disappeared, I wasn't just escaping the cold. I was crossing a threshold into a fight. And Clifford Nolan was through with being the one who takes the fall. The sign above the Red Crown Motel sputtered and buzzed its letters, dying in a rhythm that mirrored the throbbing behind my temples. At the front desk, a sheet of bulletproof glass separated me from the clerk, a man whose eyes had gone yellow and whose shirt had seen neither soap nor water in recent memory. He studied me like I was a problem he hadn't asked for. I peeled my soaked, wrinkled bills off one another and laid them down. $45. Once upon a time, $45 was what I handed the parking attendant without breaking stride. That night, it was everything. Room 7. He slid a key through the slot with a grunt. "Don't lose it, no duplicates. Out by 10 o'clock, keep it quiet, no visitors." I took the key. Cold, tacky. I hauled my bags over the cracked linoleum, the wheels catching and dragging on every raised seam. The courtyard beyond smelled of old tobacco exhaust and something unspoken but understood. In the distance, sirens, the steady lullaby of a neighborhood the rest of the city had stopped thinking about. Room 7. The doorframe was splintered in ways that told a story. I shouldered it open, and the smell met me, head on. Mildew bleach stretched thin over something bleach couldn't quite reach. Desperation soaked into the walls. I threw the deadbolt. Wedged a chair beneath the handle, an instinct from decades-old trucking routes through places where locks alone were wishful thinking. An instinct I'd believed I'd outgrown. Then I lowered myself onto the mattress edge. It buckled inward springs, crying out beneath me. Clifford Nolan, builder of a logistics empire, employer of thousands. Sitting in a room that cost less than a decent bottle of wine, afraid someone might kick the door in and rob him of absolutely nothing. My stomach seized a sharp, hollow clench. I hadn't put food in my mouth since morning. I went into my pocket for the change remaining from Devin's $200, most of it already surrendered to the room and the cab. $3.50. I made my way to the vending machine at the end of the hall. I looked at what was on offer. Chips, peanut butter crackers, a packet of instant oatmeal. I fed in the coins and chose the oatmeal. Warm. It would have to be a meal. I stood there watching the coil inch around, quietly begging it not to jam. When the packet fell, the relief that moved through me was so enormous I was ashamed of it. Back in the room, I used the bathroom tap for hot water and ate without a word to anyone. Plastic fork on cardboard. Every mouthful tasted like surrender. This was rock bottom, the exact location where a man's dignity goes, to be buried. I stretched out on the bed trembling. The wet cold had burrowed all the way to the marrow. My skull felt thick and scorched. A fever was taking root. I shut my eyes. Sleep wasn't there. What was there was memory, and it arrived with the precision of a nightmare. I was back at that boardroom table. The long mahogany surface threw back the faces of everyone I had once trusted. Dorian Page sat opposite me, my attorney, the man I was paying to stand between my legacy and ruin. $5,000 suit, a smile that had been purchased with my future, and at the far end of the table sat Devin, staring at his own hands. Dorian pitched his voice low and measured. The brake failure evidence is circumstantial, but the press wants a body. Take this to a jury, and they'll gut the company. They'll pull Devin in alongside you. His role in maintenance oversight makes him technically exposed. I remember fixing my eyes on Devin. He seemed young, too young, not made for what a prison sentence or a public scandal would do to him. What exactly are you proposing, Dorian? I asked. Enter the plea, Dorian said. Acknowledge a failure of executive oversight. Pay the fine. Settle with the plaintiffs. Walk away from the CEO chair. The business lives. Devin walks. You absorb the damage, Clifford. You're the father. That's the job. I looked at Devin once more. He finally raised his face toward mine. His eyes were wet. Dad, he said, barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do. If they charge me, everything is gone. Renata leaves. It's over. That boardroom had never been so silent. I surveyed the company I had spent my life constructing. Then I looked at my son. There was no decision to make. There was only the sacrifice. Give me the pen, I said. And I signed. I signed off my name, my title, the company itself. I confessed to negligence I had never committed to shield a son who had actually earned the blame. I told myself I was acting as a protector. I told myself I was being his father. I opened my eyes. The motel ceiling stared back at me, the fever pressing against the backs of my eyes from the inside. I had been played for a fool. I hadn't protected him. I had made it easier for him to keep going. Dorian knew the whole time. Devin knew. They had read me perfectly. They understood that I would step in front of any train before I'd watch my son get hit by one, so they laid me across the tracks. The understanding hit me like something physical colder than the room more hollow than the hunger gnawing at my gut. I had given up everything for a man who wouldn't spare me a basement cot. The phone rang. It tore through the silence of that room like a crack of a rifle. I lurched upright, pulse slamming. Midnight. Who on earth had this number and knew where I was? My cracked phone screen glowed on the nightstand, rattling against the cheap wood surface. Unknown caller. I picked it up. My hand was unsteady. Hello? My voice had the texture of gravel soaked in illness. Clifford. The voice was the same commanding deep, offering no warmth whatsoever. Augustine Croft. Croft, I said. How did you track me down here? I told you I've been watching Clifford, and I'll be honest, I'm let down by what I'm seeing. The Red Crown Motel. You are worth more than this place. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. I have no patience for your games tonight, Croft. I'm exhausted. I'm running a fever. Let me be. You cannot afford exhaustion, Croft shot back. And self-pity is a luxury that's been revoked. Look out your window. I hesitated. I got up, legs unreliable beneath me, and crossed to the window. The curtains were rigid with accumulated grime. I opened a gap just barely. Out in the parking lot, hemmed in by rusted sedans and work trucks, sat a Phantom, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, immaculate gleaming beneath the stuttering streetlights like a dark jewel dropped into a pile of refuse. The engine idled in a low resonant purr that came up through the glass. That is my car, Croft said. My driver is standing by. Pack your things. I don't accept handouts, I said, my pride making one final stand. Especially not from you. We were rivals, Croft. You spent years trying to buy me out. I am not offering charity, Clifford. I am offering you a position. I am offering you a weapon. You can stay in that room eating instant oatmeal while your son dismantles your fleet and sells it off in pieces, or you can get even. The words settled over me. I looked at the oatmeal on the table. I looked at the chair propped under the door handle. I thought about the look on Devin's face as he pushed those crumpled bills at me. I thought about Renata's sneer. What is it you want from me? I asked. I want to bring down the people who did this to you, Croft said, and I believe that is what you want as well. But you cannot wage that fight from a motel room. Get in the car, Clifford. Bring your anger. Leave the pity behind. The line went dead. I stood in the silence, listening to nothing. Then I moved. I didn't fold a single thing. I drove everything into the bags with a fury I hadn't known I was still capable of. I shrugged on my coat. I checked myself in the cracked mirror above the sink. Old, worn down. But the eyes were different. The grief had drained out of them. In its place, something cold had taken root. I reached into my inner breast pocket and felt for my old pocket knife. A simple tool. I'd carried it since my trucking days when it was practical and not symbolic. I pressed the blade open, still sharp. I folded it shut and slipped it back. I wasn't walking into this meeting as someone begging for mercy. I wasn't going as a man who had been beaten. I was going as someone who had decided it was time to start cutting ties losses and whatever else needed cutting. I pulled the chair away from the door. I disengaged the deadbolt and stepped out into the night. The rain had quit, but the pavement was still dark and wet underfoot. I moved past the front office where the clerk had fallen asleep at his post. I walked directly toward the black car. The rear door swung open before I'd even closed the distance. A large suited man materialized, lifted my bags without a syllable, and held the door. I paused. I turned back and looked at room 7. I looked at the Red Crown Motel sign still stuttering overhead. I made a vow to myself quietly with no witnesses. I would not be this powerless again. I would not be this stripped down again. And the next time I stood in front of my son, it would not be on his porch in the rain. I would be looking down at him. I bent and climbed into the leather interior, the door shut with a dense, costly sound, sealing away the sirens, the smell, and the man Clifford Nolan used to be. The car eased forward, riding over the potholes, like they weren't there, moving toward the city skyline, where the wolves made their home. Tonight, I was joining the pack. The iron gates of the Croft estate parted with a slow, silent authority that announced old money without saying a word. As the Rolls-Royce climbed the curving driveway, flanked by oaks that had stood since before my grandfather, drew breath, that familiar pressure built in my chest. The same pressure I used to feel walking into a union negotiation, or bracing for a hostile acquisition, the instinct to put on armor. I was walking into a lion's den with no chair and no whip. All I had was my pocket knife and a fever that hadn't broken. The car came to rest before a limestone mansion that looked less like a private home and more like a seat of government. The driver opened my door. I stepped out and fastened my coat to conceal the stains on my shirt. Augustine Croft would not see me trembling. I climbed the stone steps with my chin level. A butler pulled the door before my knuckle touched wood, conducting me through a foyer where the sound of my cheap shoes on marble rang like a small embarrassment. We moved into a library perfumed with leather cigar smoke and the scent of ruthless decisions made over many decades. Augustine Croft stood at the fireplace with his back to the room. A tall man, broad across the shoulders. His hair had gone white as the marble beneath our feet. He didn't turn when I entered. He offered no drink, no chair, none of the performative courtesies that men at our level usually exchange, like poker chips. "You look terrible," Clifford Croft said, his gaze still on the fire. "I've had a rough week, Augie," I replied, using the nickname I knew landed badly. A small blade, a reminder that I was standing here as his equal, not his subordinate. "I didn't come to talk about my appearance. You mentioned a proposition." Croft turned. His face was a topographic map of difficult choices, eyes the color of blue ice. He moved to his massive mahogany desk, a fortress between us, and stayed on his feet. He lifted a thick manila envelope and sent it skimming across the polished surface. It stopped right at the edge within reach of my hand. "Open it," Croft said. I glanced at him, then at the envelope. I broke the clasp and pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs. Glossy, brutal, impossible to argue with. The accident. The crash that had ended my career killed a driver and left a young mother paralyzed. I had seen versions of these in the courtroom, murky black and white copies passed across a table. These were different. Extreme close-ups of the undercarriage. I focused on the first image. It showed the brake line. I brought it closer. My hands had developed a faint tremor. I knew trucks the way some men know scripture. Every bolt, every fitting, every hose. When a brake line fails under pressure, when it frays from wear, it looks like a cigar that's been torn apart. The edges splay outward, rough and jagged. What I was looking at was clean, a straight diagonal cut, the work of a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. I went to the next photograph. Same line, different angle. No rust, no deterioration. The line had been new before someone put a blade to it. I raised my eyes to Croft. My heart was hitting harder now than it had in that motel room. This was not a maintenance failure, I said, barely above a whisper. This was deliberate. Croft gave a slow nod, settling his weight back against the desk and folding his arms. It was sabotage, Clifford. And you absorbed the punishment for it. You entered that plea believing it was a question of negligence, that someone on your team had missed a service check. It wasn't. Someone targeted your legacy and burned it to the ground on purpose. My thoughts scrambled. Who my competitors? The Union Croft let out a short, dry laugh that contained nothing warm. Me, Clifford. If I had wanted to ruin you, I would have bought your debt and foreclosed years ago. I beat people in the open market. I don't crouch in maintenance yards after midnight with wire cutters. No, this was an inside job. Whoever did this had access to that yard after hours. I shook my head. Our security doesn't bend. Nobody walks through that gate without a badge. Exactly, Croft said. He opened a desk drawer and produced a single sheet of paper, sliding it across to me. I looked at it. A maintenance log, dated the night before the crash. It authorized an emergency brake inspection on Unit 404, the truck that went down. I scanned to the bottom of the page. There was a signature, a handwriting I had seen so many times over the years, it was practically part of my own memory. On report cards, on birthday cards, on the check I had written for the down payment on his house. Approved by Devin Nolan, Director of Operations. The room seemed to lean sideways. I pressed both hands against the desk edge to anchor myself. No, I said. The word came out low and rough, more animal than speech. No. This isn't right. Devin is careless. He is complacent. But he is not this. He would not kill people. He is my son. He wouldn't destroy innocent lives just to wound me. He didn't do it to wound you, Clifford. Croft's voice dropped, the sharpness giving way to something almost measured, almost gentle, which made it more devastating. He did it to remove you. As long as you were CEO, he was always going to be nothing more than the founder's son. He needed a crisis large enough to drive you out, but not so catastrophic it sank the company entirely. He miscalculated. He cut too deep. He may not have set out to kill anyone, but he absolutely intended to cause that crash. You are lying, I said, and my voice came out at full volume before I could stop it. The rage detonated inside me. I came to my feet, squaring off against Croft. You are trying to turn me against my own son. Why, what do you stand to gain from this? You want my client list. You want my roots. I want to win. Clifford Croft fired back, his voice bouncing off the book-lined walls. And I cannot win against a ghost. I purchased your debt today. Did you know I own Phoenix Holdings? Now I own you, but I didn't buy it to bury you. I bought it because I despise incompetence. And your son is the living definition of it. He is liquidating your assets for pennies on the dollar to my competitors. He is tearing down your life's work to fund sports cars and jewelry for that wife of his. He stopped. He drew a long breath. He looked at me with something that edged toward pity. I couldn't stand it. You don't believe me, Croft said. You think a father's love runs deeper than a son's greed? I held his gaze. I called up Devin's face at that door. I recalled him pressing those crumpled bills into my hand. I remembered the coldness in his eyes, but murder sabotage. That was a line I couldn't bring myself to cross. Show me real proof, I said, not just a signature on a piece of paper. Anyone could have put that there. Croft reached into his pocket and set a small digital recorder on the desk between us. My private investigator captured this 3 days ago, Croft said. It was recorded at a restaurant downtown Arden. Your son and his wife were celebrating. Celebrating what I asked, dread already pooling low in my gut. Celebrating your resignation, Croft said. He pressed play. The audio was crisp. Silverware clinked. The ambient hum of a busy dining room rose and fell. And then a voice, Devin's voice. Unmistakable. He sounded loose. He sounded content. I am telling you, Renata, it is over, Devin said. The old man signed the plea deal. He is out. The board is naming me interim CEO tomorrow. Then came Renata's voice, bright and sharp with excitement. Finally. I thought he would never let go. He was going to die in that chair. He practically did. Devin laughed, a sound that cut straight through me. You should have seen him, Renata. He looks so defeated. He actually believes he is saving me. He thinks he is taking the bullet for the maintenance crew in the settlement. Renata asked. Insurance covers most of it, Devin said. We sell off the older fleet to cover the fines. We downsize and then we sell the whole operation to Global Transport. They have been pushing a buyout for years. Sell, I whispered. I never wanted to sell. But what about Clifford? Renata asked on the tape. What if he tries to fight his way back? What if he wants to stay at the house? Devin let out a sigh. The sound of a man dealing with a minor inconvenience. We won't allow it. If he makes noise, we put him in a facility. There is one up north, Birchwood Manor. It is cheap. We can invoke the power of attorney he signed during the lawsuit preparations. We have him declared incompetent stress and trauma. We get him put away, Renata. And then we enjoy what is ours. Birchwood Manor. Renata said, her voice light with amusement. It sounds dreadful. It is, Devin said. But it is what he deserves for making me wait this long. Cheers, babe. To the future. Cheers, Renata said. To us. Croft pressed stop. The silence that settled was absolute. The silence of a sealed tomb. The silence of a world collapsing inward. I stood there, eyes fixed on the small black device. The words played on a loop inside my skull. He thinks he is saving me. We get him put away. Birchwood Manor. My knees buckled. I didn't go down, but I dropped into the leather chair across from the desk. Cold swept through me. Colder than I had been standing in the rain. Colder than the motel bed. This was the cold of something dying. The Clifford Nolan who had walked through the front door of this library, the father still willing to believe in his son, died in that chair. I stared at my hands. These hands had pressed a cool cloth to Devin's forehead when he ran a fever as a child. These hands had taught him to throw a baseball. These hands had built a kingdom and handed him the keys. Annie wanted to lock me in a cage. I looked up at Croft. My vision was swimming, but not with tears. I was past grief. I had crossed into a territory that had no name. Why, I asked. My voice barely existed. Why bring me here to show me this? Because Croft said, leaning in his eyes carrying a hard, focused light. I know what it means to be written off. I know what it feels like when people start waiting for you to disappear. And there is still a fire in you, Clifford. It is nearly out, but it is burning. You can sit in that chair and let a broken heart finish you. You can go to Birchwood Manor and stare at a wall for whatever years you have left. Or you can get up. I looked at the photographs of the severed brake line. I looked at the recorder on the desk. I felt the weight of the pocket knife in my coat pocket. I rose slowly to my feet. The fever was gone. The exhaustion had evaporated. What replaced them was a cold, uncluttered clarity. My son was gone. The man living in that colonial mansion was a stranger who had wrecked my life, a stranger who had put innocent people in the ground and in wheelchairs, a stranger who needed to be answered. I straightened my jacket. I looked Augustine Croft square in the eye. You mentioned a proposition, I said. My voice had returned to what it used to be, the voice that ran Nolan Logistics. I do have one, Croft said. A slow, measured smile crossed his face. I don't want your money. Croft, I said. I don't want a handout, good Croft said. Because that is not what I am offering. I am offering a partnership. I bring the capital. You bring the knowledge. We reclaim your company. We reclaim your house. And we dismantle everything the man who did this has built. I crossed to the window and looked out over the dark grounds of the estate. Somewhere across the city in my house, Devin was probably sleeping without a care, dreaming about the millions he would pocket by selling off my life's work. He believed I was finished. He believed I was broken. I turned back to Croft. I'm in, I said, but I have one condition, name it, Croft said. I don't just want to crush him, I said. I want him to know it was me. I want to be looking him in the eye when it all comes apart. I want him to feel the rain. Croft extended his hand. Deal, he said. I took it. His grip was iron. Mine was every bit as strong. Let's get to work, I said. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, Clifford Nolan, the father, was buried. And Clifford Nolan, the avenger, was born. You think this ends with your son? Croft asked, his voice slicing through the stillness of the library like a blade with teeth. You think this is only about a spoiled boy wanting his inheritance ahead of schedule? You are thinking too small, Clifford. That has always been your blind spot. You play the game with your heart while everyone else is playing with knives. I looked up from the recorder. My hands were still unsteady, but the shock was beginning to calcify into something colder, something harder. What are you talking about? I asked. I just listened to my son plan to have me committed. What else is there? Croft came around the desk. He pulled a second file from the stack, thinner than the first, but the contents hit with more venom. He opened it and angled a photograph toward me. It was Renata. She looked younger. Her hair was different, darker, less polished, but those eyes were identical, cold and precise as a scalpel. She was standing beside a man I placed immediately, a man I had despised for 30 years, a man named Harlan Beckett, who ran the shipping cartels along the Eastern Corridor. Beckett, I said under my breath. Why is Renata standing with Harlan Beckett? Because she is his daughter, Croft said. Illegitimate? He kept her off the record, out of sight. But he raised her. He trained her. She did not stumble into your son's orbit at that charity gala 3 years ago, Clifford. She was placed there. Beckett couldn't defeat you in the marketplace. Your reputation was airtight. Your contracts were locked down too tight to crack. So he sent her in to pull the House of Nolan apart from the inside. The room tilted. This wasn't just betrayal, it was an occupation. I thought back to the wedding. I remembered Beckett sending a generic gift without showing his face. I thought about how Renata had quietly narrowed the circle around Devon, how she had dripped poison into his ear about my management choices, how she had nudged him toward cutting corners on maintenance. She is a corporate saboteur, Croft went on. She ran the same operation against a technology firm in Silicon Valley 5 years ago. She walked down the aisle with the VP, bled him dry through a scandal, and left with a settlement that gutted the company. This has nothing to do with heartbreak, Clifford. It's a business transaction, and you were the asset being liquidated. My fingers dug into the armrest until the leather groaned. My son wasn't merely a traitor. He was a pawn, a dull, expendable pawn moved across a board by men whose names he'd never even heard. Does Devon know any of this? I asked. Does he understand what she actually is? Croft shook his head. Not a thing. He believes he masterminded the whole operation. He thinks he captured the trophy wife and claimed the throne. What he can't see is that the moment Global Transport closes the deal, Beckett will hand him divorce papers, strip away half of everything, and leave him with nothing but the shame of betraying his own father. She'll devour him whole. Clifford. I got to my feet. Every trace of the weakness I'd felt at the motel had burned away, replaced by something electric, adrenaline surging through me like current through a live wire. Beckett had been after my company from the start, my legacy, and my own son had delivered it. This changes the whole picture, I said. My voice was low. It changes nothing at all. Croft fired back. You're still broke. You're still without a roof. Tomorrow morning, your son announces the fleet sale unless you move tonight. I looked one last time at the photograph of Renata and Beckett. I burned their faces into my memory. I pressed the hatred down into my bones like iron. I will not hand them this win, I said. Then stop being proud and take my money, Croft said. Let me cover your legal costs. Let me put you back on the board. I studied Augustin Croft where he sat. He was dangling a rope into my hole. He was offering me solid ground. But I understood how Croft did business. Nothing came without a price. Accept his money and I'd become his instrument. Another pawn. No, I said. Croft's brow furrowed. Excuse me. No, I repeated each word deliberate. I don't want your charity, Croft. Keep your pity funds. If we're doing this, we do it standing level, as equals. Equals? Croft laughed, a short, harsh barking sound. Look at yourself, Clifford. That suit reeks of wet pavement and defeat. You have $60 to your name. Tell me precisely what you're bringing to this table that earns you the word equals. I pressed 2 fingers to my temple. I have what's in here. 40 years reading every corner of this city. I know where the bodies are buried, Croft. I know which union bosses have a price and which ones can't be moved. I know the zoning gaps Beckett threads his cargo through. I know the off-book routes your own drivers run to skip the way stations. Croft's laughter stopped cold. His eyes narrowed to slits. I carry a ledger no one can subpoena, I said, closing the distance between us. Every marker held against me by city council members and precinct captains, debts I never once collected because I played it straight. That version of me is dead. What's standing here is a man with nothing left to protect, and I'm putting every one of those favors on the table. The full invisible map of how logistics actually moves in this state. That knowledge is worth 10 times the debt you bought from the bank. I watched the math move behind Croft's eyes. He was a shark who'd just scented blood. But it wasn't mine this time. It was Beckett's. Your network for my resources, Croft said. My mind for your muscle, I corrected. I'll hand you the blueprint to dismantle Beckett. I'll give you the leverage to crush his cartel. In exchange, you finance my move against my son. so I can reclaim what belongs to me. We bring them both down. You get the monopoly you've always chased. I get my dignity back. Croft crossed to the window and stared out into the darkness of the estate. The silence between us stretched long. I didn't breathe. This was the gamble the moment I walked out a partner or crawled out a beggar. You become a very different creature when you're cornered, Clifford Croft said quietly. I had good teachers, I answered. He turned. A slow, measured smile moved across his face, the look of a general who just identified his best officer. It is a deal, he said. His hand came forward. I took it. His grip was iron. Mine was steel. We move fast, Croft said. The auction on your central warehouse is 2 weeks out. Devon isn't wasting any time. We can't put you back in play with you looking like this. He let his gaze travel over my soaked clothes, my gray stubble, my hollowed face. Clifford Nolan is dead, Croft said. The man who came through my door tonight doesn't exist. If your son is the target you need to become someone he won't place until it's already over. I understand, I said. Good. Croft pressed the intercom on his desk. Carver, get the guest suite ready and reach my tailor and my barber. We have a resurrection to schedule. The bathroom in the guest suite was larger than my whole room at the Red Crown Motel. Heated marble underfoot, gold-frame mirrors on every wall. I peeled the soaked suit from my body and dropped it in the corner where it hit the floor with a dull, wet slap. That suit belonged to someone else, the Clifford who still believed in family, who thought fair play was rewarded. I was done with him. I stepped into the shower and turned it as hot as it would go. I worked at my skin until it burned red. I needed the rain scrubbed off. I needed Devon's hand gone from my memory, the image of him pressing those bills into my palm, pity in his eyes. I washed away all of it, the shame, the grief. When I stepped out, I felt stripped down to something harder. I looked at the man in the mirror, old, worn, his beard a wild gray wreck that marked him as a man the world had finished with. On the counter sat the straight razor Croft had left out, polished walnut handle blade honed to a whisper. I lathered my jaw. I met my own eyes in the glass. Goodbye, Clifford. Just a whisper. I drew the blade down my cheek in a slow, steady stroke. The gray fell away in strips, exposing skin that hadn't seen light in a decade. 10 years of beard. Grown in the months after my wife was buried. The one my granddaughter used to grab in her small fist. I took it off pass by pass until nothing remained. The stranger in the mirror had a jaw that was square and hard. The face leaner, drawn tight. The years showed plainly without the beard to soften them, but they didn't read as age anymore. They read as damage. They read like armor. A suit waited on the bedroom bed. Nothing like my old conservative grays. Charcoal black English wool, the cut sharp and aggressive. White shirt with French cuffs. A silk tie the color of dark ash. I dressed without rushing. The fabric settled against me like a second skin. I fastened the cufflinks gold, solid, cold. Then the shoes mirror bright. I moved to the full-length mirror in the corner. No retired grandfather stared back. No victim. A titan. A predator who knew exactly where his prey slept. I reached into the jacket's pocket and transferred my old pocket knife from the heap of wet clothing, the only thing I carried forward, a fixed point, a reminder. I straightened my tie and let my eyes go flat. 71 years of decency, of good faith, of choosing the high road extinguished. In its place, cold, precise calculation. I was ready. I opened the door. My heels struck the hallway floor like gunshots. I wasn't walking to find Croft. I was stepping onto a battlefield. God help anyone in my way. The Rolls-Royce let me out 2 blocks from the house. I'd already changed back into the ruined, rain-soaked clothes. I pressed dirt into my palms and smeared it across my face, then practiced the walk, a shuffle, a limp. The gait of a man the world had ground into nothing. This was the real test. Part of me, the father, still hoped. Hoped that seeing me broken and hollow at his door would reach something buried in him, that it would crack whatever had frozen over in his chest. But the part of me that had shaken Croft's hand knew better. I came up the driveway. Night had fallen, and the house blazed against it, every window burning bright. From the backyard came the sounds of celebration. Music voices rising, the bright clinking of glasses. They were toasting my ruin. The sale. Their freedom from the old man who'd built everything they were busy drinking away. I reached the front door but didn't knock. I circled around to the side gate, the one that opened onto the patio. I wanted to be seen. I wanted his guests to lay eyes on me. I pushed it open. It swung wide with a rusty groan into the night air. The patio was packed. Men in tuxedos, women in gowns, waiters threading through the crowd with champagne trays. At the center of it all stood Devin. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a glass of scotch in his hand. Renata was at his side, glittering in diamonds that had been paid for with my ruin. I stepped into the light. Devin. I croaked. My voice was a rasp just right for the part I was playing. Devin, please. The laughter died on the spot. Heads turned. The music seemed to falter. Devin went still. He lowered his glass in slow motion, eyes widening as they found me. I must have looked like a ghost, a specter of guilt drifting through his victory celebration. Dad, he whispered. I moved a step closer, stumbling a little. I haven't eaten in 2 days, son. I lost my wallet. The motel threw me out. All I'm asking for is a plate of food, a glass of water. I'll sleep in the shed. I won't be in anyone's way. Devin glanced around at his guests. I caught the panic flashing across his face. This wasn't worry for his father. This was the terror of a man watching his image crack in public. He was the young tycoon, the heir apparent. He could not have a beggar for a father. Who is that Devin? A man nearby asked, tall, silver-haired, carrying himself with easy authority. I knew the face. He was the CEO of Global Transport, the man buying my company. Devin's jaw tightened. His eyes moved from me to the CEO and back again. I watched the calculation happen. I watched the decision land. Nobody, Devin said, his voice carrying clean and clear across the patio. Just the old gardener. Let him go a few months back. He's had some trouble drinking his mind. The gardener. He denied me. He erased me. Standing in front of the man purchasing my life's work, he transformed his own father into a dismissed employee. Oh, the CEO said, his shoulders easing. Poor soul. Best let security handle it. Devin moved toward me, his face a hard mask of fury. You need to leave Clifford, he hissed, not even bothering with Dad anymore. You are trespassing. Walk away before I get the police involved. I held his gaze. I am hungry, Devin, I said, keeping my voice low. I am your own flesh and blood. I don't know you, he said loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. Get off my property. Then Renata stepped forward. Her face was pulled into a sneer of absolute contempt. She didn't see a father-in-law. She saw a smudge on her flawless evening. You heard him, she snapped. Get out, or do I need to help you along? She turned toward a large man stationed near the edge of the patio, holding the leashes of their 2 Rottweilers. Guard dogs. Dogs I had bought them for protection. Release them, Renata ordered. Devin, no, I shouted, turning to my son. Don't do this. Devin didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just looked away. He looked down at his shoes. He let it happen. The handler unclipped the leashes. The dogs erupted savage, guttural barking. They surged toward me, teeth-bared eyes fixed on the intruder. I turned and ran, not because terror owned me, though my heart was slamming against my ribs. I ran because the script called for it. I scrambled back through the gate, my feet sliding on wet grass. I heard jaws snapping at the air behind me. I heard guests gasp, a few laughing nervously. I cleared the fence just as the dogs hit the wood, hurling themselves against it in a frenzy. I kept running. I sprinted down the block, into the dark where the Rolls-Royce was waiting. I pressed my back against the car, pulling air into my lungs. My chest heaved. Sweat and grime streaked my face. I looked back toward the house. The lights still burned. The music had picked up again. They had already moved on. The gardener was gone. The nuisance had been dealt with. I wasn't crying. I wasn't trembling. I reached into my pocket and drew out a handkerchief. I wiped the dirt from my face. I straightened up. A smile spread slowly across my lips. It wasn't a warm one. It was cold. It was the smile of a judge reading a death sentence into the record. He had failed. He had failed the last test. There would be no redemption now. No mercy. I opened the car door and settled into the back seat. Croft was already there watching me. Well, he asked. He released the dogs, I said. Croft gave a slow nod. Good, then we are clear. We are clear, I agreed. Burn it down, Augie. Burn all of it down. The car eased away into the night. The father was gone. Only the executioner remained, and the execution was set to begin at dawn. The morning sun caught the glass face of the Phoenix Holdings building, flooding the office in a blaze of light. I sat in the executive chair, swiveling slowly to survey the bank of monitors mounted on the wall. I wasn't wearing my old worn suit. I was wearing a slate gray 3-piece that cost more than the car I used to drive. I wasn't Clifford Nolan, the retired trucker. I was the silent partner of Augustin Croft, and today I was pulling the trigger. 1 week had passed since the night with the dogs. 1 week of silence, 1 week of moving assets through the shadows. Croft had opened his legal team to me, his forensic accountants, his private security. We had operated like ghosts, acquiring the promissory notes, the liens, and the debts that Devin had scattered across the city like confetti. He believed he was living in a mansion. What he didn't grasp was that he was living in a house of cards, and I had just bought the wind. On the center monitor, a live security feed showed the front porch of my son's house. It was 8 a.m. The courier I'd hired was coming up the driveway. He wasn't delivering a pizza or an Amazon box. He was carrying a certified letter in a red envelope. I watched Devin open the door. He looked like he hadn't slept. Hair disheveled silk robe knotted loosely at the waist. He signed for the envelope with a scowl, probably figuring it was paperwork on the warehouse sale. He tore it open right there on the porch. I zoomed in. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew them cold. I had dictated every one. Notice of immediate foreclosure. Default on loan agreement, number 4099. Accelerated payment demanded. I watched Devin's face go slack. He read it again, blinking. His head shook a tight, jerky motion. He yanked his phone from his pocket thumbs, moving fast across the screen. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was opening his banking app. He was reaching for the safety net. On a second monitor, a data stream pulled from the bank's server access arranged through Croft standing with the board showed the state of Devin's accounts. Account status frozen. Reason suspicious activity fraud investigation. Devin stared at his screen. He jabbed at it furiously as though force of will could make the money reappear. He started pacing in tight, frantic loops on the expensive doormat. The ground he'd been standing on wasn't solid at all. It was a trap door, and I had just thrown the lever. Then his phone rang. I had no camera at the spa, but I didn't need one. The report from the private investigator came through on my tablet moments later. Renata was at the Luminary Wellness Center. She had just finished a $300 facial and a mud wrap. She drifted up to the counter in a plush white robe and laid down the black credit card she was so proud of. The card tied to the corporate expense account, the account I had built. The card was declined. I could picture the whole scene without effort. The receptionist polite but firm. Renata's laugh high and brittle. "Try it again," she would say. "There must be a mistake." They tried again. Declined. Code 04, pickup card. The receptionist would have reached for a pair of scissors. I had personally instructed the credit card company to issue a confiscation order for fraud. Renata would have stood there mouth open, watching her card get cut in two. I turned back to Devin on the monitor. He answered his phone. He held it away from his ear. Even with no audio, it was plain that Renata was screaming. Her perfect morning had come apart at the seams. She was humiliated. And when Renata was humiliated, she wanted blood. Devin was shouting back now, waving the red envelope at an empty street, gesturing at nothing. He looked like a man going under. He ended the call and immediately punched in another number. I glanced at the burner phone sitting on the desk in front of me. It was the number for my old cell, the one he'd dialed for years, but only when he needed money, the one he'd ignored when I needed a roof over my head. I waited for it to ring. It didn't. I had cut that line 3 days ago. On the monitor, Devin pulled the phone slowly from his ear. He stared at the screen in disbelief. He dialed again, then once more. He slammed the phone down on the porch railing. He couldn't process it. The old man simply wasn't there anymore. The ATM was out of order. The punching bag had disappeared. He bolted inside. Minutes later, he emerged in a suit, though he looked like he'd dressed in the dark. He dropped into his leased Mercedes and tore out of the driveway. He was headed to the bank. I pressed the intercom button. "Croft," I said. "He is on his way to Heritage Trust." Good Croft's voice returned. "The stage is set." I switched the monitor feed to the lobby of Heritage Trust Bank. It was a grand marble-floored space engineered to make you feel small and the money feel immense. Devin came crashing through the revolving doors. He didn't stand in line. He cut straight to the glass-walled office of the branch manager. He slapped both palms on her desk. I could see the manager, a composed woman named Mrs. Pemberton, who had worked alongside me for 20 years, look up from behind her glasses. She didn't flinch. She said something to him, gesturing toward a computer screen. Devin was shouting now. Other customers rotated to look. Security guards edged closer, hands hovering near their belts. Devin jabbed his finger at the screen, then at himself. He was running the "do you know who I am" routine. Mrs. Pemberton shook her head. She slid a sheet of paper across the desk. He snatched it. He read it. I knew every word it contained. It said that Heritage Trust Bank, due to discrepancies in his income statements he had falsified to qualify for the loan, claiming sole ownership of assets that were legally mine, had exercised its right to sell the debt. They had offloaded it to a private equity firm, a firm called Phoenix Holdings. Devin looked up. He shouted something that read on his lips like, "Who is Phoenix?" Mrs. Pemberton pointed to the door. Devin didn't move. He grabbed a chair and threw it. It skated across the polished floor and crashed into a velvet rope stand. That was the signal. Two large security guards converged. They weren't gentle about it. One locked onto his left arm, the other his right. Devin fought them, kicking and hollering like a child being hauled out of a toy store. His suit jacket split at the shoulder. His expensive watch cracked against the doorframe. They dumped him out onto the sidewalk. He went down on his hands and knees, the foreclosure notice drifting down and settling beside him. Passers-by stopped to stare. Some raised their phones. The son of Clifford Nolan, heir to a logistics empire, thrown out of a bank like a common drunk. I leaned back in my chair high up in the Phoenix Holdings building. I lifted my coffee cup, black, bitter, and scalding. It tasted like justice. He still didn't know. He didn't know that Phoenix Holdings was the bird that climbed out of the ashes of the fire he had lit. He didn't know that the man occupying the president's chair, the man holding the deed to his house and the leash to his life, was the same man he'd left standing in the rain. He got to his feet and brushed the grit from his knees. He looked around wild-eyed. No money, no credit, no home, and no father. I reached for the phone and called Croft. "Phase 1 is complete," I said. "He is broken now. We squeeze," Croft said. I hung up. I looked at my son's image on the screen, lost in the middle of the city he thought he owned. "You wanted me to find somewhere else to live, Devin," I whispered to the empty room. "I did. I live in your nightmares now." I was sitting in the dim interior of a surveillance van, parked 3 blocks from the Ritz-Carlton. Beside me was Croft's private investigator, a man named Hawkins, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but had the sharp, unblinking eyes of a hawk. On the small screen in front of us, a grainy video played. It had been captured by a hidden camera inside the hotel bar. There she was, Renata. She looked luminous, more alive than she ever seemed beside my son. She had on a red dress cut low and fitted close, one I had never laid eyes on before. Sitting across from her, his hand folded over hers on the small table, was Dorian Page. My lawyer, the man who had talked me into pleading guilty, the man who had helped tear my life apart. I watched Dorian lean in and murmur something against her ear. Renata threw her head back and laughed. It was a real laugh, nothing like the brittle manufactured sound she deployed at charity events. It was the laugh of a woman deeply pleased, or at least deeply occupied. "Turn up the audio," I said. Hawkins adjusted a dial. The ambient noise of the bar dropped away, and their voices came through sharp and damning. "He is panicking," Dorian said, swirling his martini. "The foreclosure notice arrived this morning. He has called me 5 times. He thinks I can stop it." Renata took a sip of her wine. "Can you stop it?" Dorian smiled, slow and satisfied. "I can delay it, long enough for the warehouse auction to clear. Once that cash lands in the corporate account, we move it to the offshore shell company we put in place. Then you file for divorce, cite financial instability and fraud. You walk away with half of whatever remains, which won't be much, and you leave him buried in the debt." Renata ran a fingertip around the rim of her glass. "It seems cruel, Dorian. He really does love me in his own sad way." "He is a sinking ship, darling," Dorian said. "You don't stay aboard a sinking ship out of loyalty to the captain. You climb into the lifeboat, and I am the lifeboat." I kept my eyes on the screen. The betrayal was total. This wasn't simple greed. It was a coordinated demolition. My son was being carved up like a carcass, and the woman holding the knife was the one sharing his bed. I felt a strange, crooked flicker of sympathy for Devin. He was a fool, yes. He was weak, yes. But he hadn't earned this. Nobody earns this. He thought he was running the game, but he was just the board they were playing on. "Send me that file," I told Hawkins. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. "I am going to light a fuse," I said. The following morning, a courier arrived at the executive offices of Nolan Logistics, or what remained of them. The sign out front was peeling. The parking lot sat half empty. Inside, Devin was occupying my old office, trying to project the bearing of a CEO while the walls tightened around him. The courier set a small, elegantly wrapped box on his desk. It had weight to it. Silver paper, white ribbon. No card. Devin frowned. He hadn't ordered anything. He picked it up and gave it a slight shake. He tore off the paper. Inside was a velvet jewelry box. He lifted the lid. Resting on the black cushion was a watch. A Patek Philippe. Gold, heavy, breathtaking. A watch that carried a $50,000 price tag. Devin stared at it. He didn't own a Patek Philippe. He couldn't afford one. He leaned in closer. Engraved on the caseback were two initials SF, Dorian Page. Beneath the watch, folded with precision, was a receipt. A credit card receipt from a jeweler in Paris, dated 3 months prior. The card used to pay for it belonged to Renata Nolan. The memo line read, "Happy anniversary, my love." I watched Devin's face on the hidden camera I had placed in the office days earlier. Confusion folded into shock, then slowly into a cold, spreading horror. He knew that watch. He had seen it on Dorian's wrist in their meetings together. He had commented on it. He picked up the receipt. He read it again. My love. He set the watch down on the desk as if it had burned him. He stood. He paced. He dragged both hands through his hair. He was working to construct an explanation. Maybe it was a mix-up. Maybe Renata had bought it for him. But no, the initials were SF. He grabbed his phone. He called Renata. I watched him wait, heel tapping the floor. Hey, babe. Renata's voice came through the speaker. I'm at the gym. What's up? Devin fixed his gaze on the watch. Hey, he said, his voice wound tight. I just received a package, a watch. A watch? Renata asked, her voice catching slightly. What kind of watch? A Patek, Devin said. It has Dorian Page's initials on it and a receipt with your signature. A long silence fell over the line. Heavy and still. Oh, that Renata said at last, her laugh coming out forced and too bright. That must be a mix-up. Dorian asked me to pick it up for him when I was in Paris last year. He paid me back in cash. The courier must have dropped it at the wrong address. Why would they send it to you? Devin narrowed his eyes. He stared at the receipt. It read, Happy Anniversary. Dorian wasn't married. Why does it say Happy Anniversary? Devin demanded. It was his work anniversary at the firm, Renata stammered. Devin, you're reading into nothing. I have to go. My trainer's waiting. She hung up. Devin stood in the empty office, the dial tone humming into silence. He looked at the watch. He looked at the phone. For the first time in his life, the cushion of his entitlement was punctured by a cold needle of doubt. He wasn't the king. He was the mark. But he couldn't bring himself to accept it. Not yet. He shoved the watch into his drawer and slammed it shut. He sat down and buried his face in his hands. It was just a mistake. It had to be, because if it wasn't, then everything he had done, betraying me, dismantling the company, had been for nothing. That night I parked the rental car down the block from his house. I watched through binoculars as he turned into the driveway. He sat behind the wheel for 10 minutes before stepping out. He moved like a man walking to the gallows. Inside the living room, lights burned bright. Through the thin curtains I could make out Renata on the sofa phone in hand texting. She was smiling at the screen. Devin walked in. He didn't greet her. He stood in the doorway watching. Who are you texting? He asked. I could read his lips. Renata startled. She tucked the phone away quickly. Just my mother, she said. She's not feeling well again. Devin crossed to the sideboard and fixed himself a drink. He didn't look at her. His eyes found his own reflection in the mirror above the bar. He looked worn. He looked old. Is she, Devin asked, or is she celebrating an anniversary? Renata rose from the sofa. What has gotten into you today? You're being irrational. Is this about the foreclosure I told you Dorian is taking care of it? Dorian, Devin repeated. Right, Dorian's handling everything. He swallowed a long pull of his drink. He was suspicious, yes, but he was also a coward. He didn't demand to see her phone. He didn't throw her out. He nursed his scotch and let the poison of doubt settle deep in his gut. He kept holding on to the lie because the truth was too terrible to look at. I lowered the binoculars. Not yet, son, I whispered. You don't get to fall apart yet. We're just getting started. I started the car and was pulled away into the dark. The seed had been planted. Now I just had to water it with fire. The central warehouse of Nolan Logistics was never just steel and concrete to me. It was the cathedral where I preached the gospel of hard work for 40 years. It was the place where I taught Devin how to drive a forklift at 16. It was where I spent Christmas Eves making sure packages reached families on time. And now, I sat in the darkened viewing booth of the auction house watching my son sell it for scrap. The room was packed with sharks. Developers, competitors, and liquidators filled the rows, numbered paddles in hand. The air carried the scent of stale coffee and pure opportunism. Devin sat up front. He was sweating. He kept fidgeting with his tie, casting nervous glances toward a man sitting 3 rows back. I recognized that man. His name was Denton, a shady real estate flipper. Croft leaned toward me. "Do you see the play?" he asked. "I see it," I replied. Denton is the straw man, a classic move born of desperation. Devin had rigged the auction. The scheme was straightforward. He had likely driven off legitimate buyers by seeding rumors about structural damage or environmental liabilities. Denton would scoop up the warehouse for a fraction of its value. Then, once the dust settled and the foreclosure on Devin's house was cleared, with the quick cash they'd flip the property for what it was actually worth and divide the profit. It was illegal. It was sloppy. It was precisely the kind of scheme Renata would dream up. I glanced at Renata. She sat beside Devin, thumbs flying across her phone. She wasn't watching the stage. Her eyes drifted to the exit signs mapping her escape. She had no interest in whether the company survived. She just needed enough cash to vanish before the whole thing went under. The auctioneer stepped to the podium. His rapid-fire chant filled the room. The bidding opened low, insultingly low. $2 million for a facility worth 20. Denton raised his paddle. 2.1. The room held its breath. The legitimate developers hung back, spooked by the whispers Devin had circulated. 2.1, going once the auctioneer called. Devin exhaled slowly. He shot a quick, triumphant look toward Denton. He thought he'd pulled it off. He thought he was sharper than the market. He thought he was sharper than me. 2.1 going twice. Then the back door swung open. A man entered. He wore a gray suit that looked unremarkable, but I knew it had cost more than Denton's car. He was Croft's personal attorney, a face no one in that room could place. He walked to the center aisle and raised his paddle. $5 million, he said. His voice was level, slicing through the auctioneer's rhythm like a blade. Devin spun around. His eyes went wide. This wasn't in the script. Denton looked rattled. He turned to Devin for direction. Devin gave a tight, frantic nod. 5.1. Denton called out, his voice unsteady. 6 million. The gray suit answered without hesitation. The room stirred. The sharks leaned forward. This wasn't a liquidation anymore. It was a war. Devin turned to Renata. She clutched his arm, whispering something urgent. I could guess the words. "Who is that? Make it stop." But Devin had no way to stop it. He had lit a fire he couldn't contain. Denton bid again. 6.5. That was likely the ceiling of the cash they'd scraped together. 10 million, the gray suit said. Devin gasped. I watched his shoulders drop, then stiffen. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. The panic was dissolving, displaced by a sudden intoxicating greed. $10 million. That was enough to clear the pressing debts. That was enough to save the house. That was enough to keep Renata content for another year. He abandoned the plan. He abandoned the long game. He forgot that without this warehouse, Nolan Logistics would cease to function as a company. He saw only the dollar signs. He turned to Denton and gave a quiet shake of his head. Stop. Let him have it. He believed he had won the lottery. He didn't understand he was trading away his oxygen tank for a breathless future. 12 million, the gray suit said, bidding against himself just to drive the point home. Sold, the auctioneer shouted, slamming the gavel down. The crack rang out like a gunshot. Devin leapt to his feet. He pulled Renata into an embrace. She smiled a genuine smile this time, the smile of a predator who had just fed. They were celebrating. They were toasting the death of my legacy because it bought them a brief reprieve. The auctioneer cleared his throat. The buyer has requested to make a brief statement regarding the future of the property. Devin settled back into his seat, looking smug. He likely expected the buyer to announce a luxury condo project or a fulfillment center. He expected congratulations for brokering such a high-value transaction. The man in the gray suit approached the podium. He didn't look at Devin. He looked at the cameras the industry press had positioned at the rear of the room. My client has acquired this property not for commercial use, the man said. The room went still. Devin frowned. This facility was built by Clifford Nolan, the man continued. It was built on a foundation of community and purpose. In light of recent events specifically, the tragic displacement of Clifford Nolan from his own home by his family, my client believes it is only right to repurpose this building. Devin's face drained of color. The smile disappeared from Renata's lips. Effective immediately, the man announced, this warehouse will be converted into the Clifford Nolan Center for the Homeless. It will serve as a refuge for elderly people who have been cast aside by their own children. It will stand as a testament to the truth that dignity cannot be auctioned off. The room erupted. Reporters began shouting questions. Photographers swung their lenses away from the podium and toward the front row toward Devin. He sat there frozen. The implication was unmistakable. It was public. The buyer wasn't simply a developer. The buyer knew. The buyer knew that Devin had thrown his father out. The buyer knew that Clifford Nolan was homeless. Devin looked around wild-eyed. He saw the judgment written across the faces of his peers. He saw the sneers of his competitors. He had just sold his father's legacy to erect a monument to his own cruelty. Renata raised her hand to her face, shielding herself from the cameras. She wasn't worried about Devin's reputation. What I'm about to share changed the weight of everything I thought I understood about the people closest to me. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If the people you had given everything to were quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you suspected? Or would you stay silent and let the evidence build until there was no way out for them? She was worried about her standing in the room. She grabbed her purse and pushed to her feet, trying to squeeze past Devin to reach the aisle. Devin caught her wrist. "Sit down," he hissed. "Don't you dare walk out on me." She wrenched her arm free. "You fool," she spat loud enough for the people in the second row to catch every word. "You made us a laughingstock. You told me the old man was dealt with." I watched from the booth. A cold satisfaction settled into my chest. Not happiness, something more like equilibrium, the equation finally balancing. Croft passed me a glass of water. "A toast," he said. "To the new community center." I took the glass. "To the homeless," I said. Down below, Devin was trying to get to his feet, clawing back some fragment of dignity. He buttoned his jacket. He turned to face the press. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "My father, he is in assisted living. This is a slanderous attack." The man in the gray suit leaned to the microphone one final time. "My client also wishes to inform Mr. Devin Nolan that he is the new owner of this property. All current inventory and logistical equipment inside the warehouse is considered abandoned. He has 24 hours to clear the premises before the locks are changed." Devin lurched backward as if he'd taken a blow. The inventory, the trucks sitting in the loading bays, the sorting machines, they were all still inside. In his haste to sell the shell, he had forgotten to move the heart. He had handed over the company's assets for nothing. He looked up toward the booth. He couldn't see me through the tinted glass, but he knew. He knew I was there. He knew this was no stranger. This was his father. I pressed my palm flat against the glass. "Run, Devin," I whispered. "Run while you still have the chance." He turned and bolted. He shoved through the crowd, deaf to the questions being hurled at him, blind to the camera flashes. He disappeared through the side door, leaving Renata standing alone. She held her ground for a moment, staring at the space where her husband had been. Then she turned and walked out the main entrance, chin lifted, carrying herself as though she had no idea who that man was. The auction was finished. The warehouse was mine. And Devin Nolan was not simply broke. He was a pariah. I turned to Croft. "What's next?" I asked. Croft smiled. "Now we make him sign his confession." I nodded. I was ready. The public humiliation had been the jab. What came next would be the knockout. And I had the perfect bait. Devin was trapped in a purgatory entirely of his own construction. He was sleeping in his in-laws' guest room, a cramped space crowded with boxes of Renata's old cheerleading trophies and thick with the smell of mothballs. His credit cards were dead plastic. His car had been repossessed the night before, towed from the curb while the neighbors looked on. He was a king with no kingdom left, and panic was gnawing him hollow. I watched him through the camera feeds Croft had tapped into. He paced the small room, phone in hand, waiting for a miracle. So I gave him one. I directed the broker, a man named Mr. Aldridge, who operated through Phoenix Holdings, to place the call. Aldridge was a shark wrapped in a silk suit, the kind of man who could sell water to a drowning man. He called Devin at noon. "Mr. Nolan." Aldridge said, his voice smooth and measured. "I represent an international investment group. We are aware of your current liquidity situation, the foreclosure, the recent auction. My clients have an interest in acquiring your remaining personal shares in Nolan Logistics. Devin stopped pacing. He sat down on the edge of the twin bed. Shares, he repeated, his voice cracked. I thought I'd lost everything. You still hold a 5% equity stake as the former director of operations, Aldridge explained. Ordinarily, it would carry little value given the bankruptcy. However, my clients are looking to consolidate full ownership in order to restructure the debt. They are prepared to offer you a buyout. How much? Devin asked. I could see his knuckles go white around the phone. $2 million, Aldridge said. Cash, today. Devin's breath caught. It was audible. $2 million wasn't just a lifeline, it was a resurrection. It was enough to settle the gambling debts he believed I knew nothing about. It was enough to put Renata back in a luxury hotel. It was enough to run. I'll take it, Devin said without hesitation. When can we meet? There is one condition. Aldridge added, his tone sharpening slightly. To finalize the transaction and clear the company's liability insurance for the incoming owners, we need to close out the maintenance lawsuits. You'll be required to sign an affidavit accepting administrative responsibility for the oversight of fleet maintenance during your tenure, a formality for the underwriters. Devin paused. He understood what it meant. He was the one who had ordered the brake lines cut to destroy me. Putting his name on that document wasn't paperwork. It was an admission that he was captain of the ship when it hit the rocks. I don't know, Devin said uneasily. That sounds like it could bring legal trouble. It is a standard liability waiver. Aldridge said smoothly, a clean lie. It shields the new owners from past negligence claims. Without it, the shares carry no value. Take the deal, Mr. Nolan, or don't. The offer expires at 5 p.m. I watched Devin hang up. He stared at the wall. He was terrified. He knew he was guilty, but he also knew he was flat broke. He needed a push. I glanced at the other monitor. Renata was in the kitchen locked in an argument with her mother about laundry. She looked wretched. Send the text to Renata, I told Croft. Croft typed a message from an anonymous number to Renata's phone. Your husband was just offered a $2 million buyout. Make sure he takes it. I watched Renata check her phone. Her eyes lit up. The misery fell away, replaced by the predatory hunger I had seen in the restaurant footage with Dorian Page. She dropped the laundry basket. She ran to the guest room. Devin, she said, bursting through the door. Is it true? Devin looked up, startled. Is what true? The buyout, she said, pulling the door shut and turning the lock. Did they offer you $2 million? Devin nodded slowly. Yes, but there's a catch. They want me to sign a liability waiver for the maintenance issues, the accident. So sign it, Renata snapped. It says I was responsible, Devin said. It says I oversaw the repairs. If the police ever see that they could reopen the investigation. Renata moved to the bed. She settled beside him, rested her hand on his knee. Her touch wasn't affection. It was possession. Devin, look at where we are, she hissed. We are living in my parents' guest room. You have no car. You have no job. Dorian won't return my calls. We are going under. Dorian, Devin muttered. He still hadn't grasped the full depth of their affair, but the suspicion was festering. $2 million is freedom, Renata breathed into his ear. We can go to Europe. We can go to the Caymans. We can build something new. Who cares about a piece of paper? Phoenix Holdings wants to clean up the books. They're not trying to put you behind bars. They want to make money. But what if... Devin started. No. Renata cut him off before he could finish. She stood, her face hardening into something cruel. I am not staying in this room, Devin. If you don't sign that paper, I am done. I'll file for divorce tomorrow. I will take whatever scraps remain, and I will find a man who actually knows how to provide. Devin looked at her. He weighed the fear of losing her against the fear of prison. She won. He was a man hollowed out by obsession. You'd leave me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Watch me, Renata said. Sign the paper and get the money, or I walk, and I'll take the dog. I'll take the jewelry. I'll take anything that isn't bolted to the floor. Devin put his face in his hands. He was cornered. On one side, the law. On the other, the woman who held his ego in her grip. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I'll do it. Renata smiled. It was the smile of a shark picking up vibrations in the water. She pressed her lips to his forehead. Good boy, she said. Call them back. Tell them we want the cash in small bills. I watched from my office. A cold resolve settled through me. He had made his choice. He had picked the money over the truth. He had picked her over his own freedom. "He's coming," I told Croft. "Get the room ready." The meeting was held in a private conference room at a high-end hotel downtown. Neutral ground. Aldrich sat at the head of the table. 2 large security guards flanked the door. On the table, a black briefcase and a single document. Devin and Renata arrived together, hands interlocked, presenting a united front. But I could see the tension coiled in Devin's shoulders. He was sweating. Renata's eyes moved constantly around the room, locked onto the briefcase. "Mr. Nolan, Mrs. Nolan," Aldrich said, motioning toward the chairs. "Thank you for making time on such short notice." "Let's just get through this," Devin said, reaching for authority he didn't quite own. Aldrich slid the document across the table. 1 page. An affidavit of responsibility and liability acceptance. It cataloged the absence of proper oversight. It laid out the specific maintenance directives for Unit 404. It stated plainly that Devin Nolan, as director, had possessed full knowledge of the budget reductions that caused the break failure. A confession dressed in contract language. Devin lifted the pen. His hand trembled. He moved through the lines. "I, Devin Nolan, accept full administrative liability." He paused. He glanced at Aldrich. "This stays internal, correct? This is strictly for your insurance records." "Strictly internal," Aldrich lied. "We just need to close out the old company liabilities so Phoenix can move forward." Devin looked at Renata. She nodded, her eyes wide and burning with greed. She tapped the briefcase with a manicured fingernail. "Sign it," she mouthed. Devin drew a slow breath. He set the pen against the paper. He signed his name, the same signature that appeared on the maintenance log, the same signature that had condemned me. "Thank you," Aldrich said. He collected the document and slipped it into a folder. He pushed the briefcase across the table. Renita went for it immediately. She snapped the latches open. Inside, stacked in clean, even rows, were bundles of $100 bills. $2 million. It carried the smell of ink and escape. Renata let out a small, breathless sound. She passed her hands over the money. Devin stared at it, relief spreading visibly across his face. He believed he had won. He believed he had slipped free of what he had done. "Is it all there?" Devin asked. "Count it if you like," Aldrich said. "But I assure you Phoenix Holdings honors its agreements." "We believe you," Renata said, snapping the case shut. She took hold of the handle. "Let's go, Devin. We have a plane to catch." They rose from their seats. Devin fastened his jacket. He looked at Aldrich. "Tell the new owner. Tell him I hope he chokes on the company." "I will convey the message," Aldrich said, his expression giving away nothing. They walked out of the room. I watched the monitor as they moved toward the elevator, gripping the briefcase the way a drowning man grips a rope. What they didn't know was that the money was real, but every serial number had been logged. They didn't know the briefcase held a GPS tracker. And they had no idea that the document Devin had just signed was already moving through a fax machine to the district attorney's office. I leaned back in my chair. The trap had closed. They had the bait. All that remained was waiting for them to throw the party. I turned to Croft. "They're going to throw a farewell party," I said. "Devin's ego won't allow him to leave this city quietly. He needs every person in his circle to see him walk away on top." Croft nodded. "And that is where we will finish it." I looked at the image of the empty conference room on the monitor. The pen was still lying where Devin had left it on the table. It had been the instrument of his undoing, and he had put it there himself. "Enjoy the money, son," I murmured. "It's the severance package for your life." The colonial mansion was shaking with the bass of music I didn't recognize. It was a celebration of excess, one last desperate howl of wealth from a man who had already forfeited everything. Devin had decided that if he was going to leave this town, he would leave a legend behind. He hired a catering company, a DJ, and an open bar stocked with top-shelf liquor. He had drawn in the city's business elite, the social climbers, and most critically, the press. He wanted to own the narrative. He wanted the headline to read, "Young Tycoon Departs with Grace and Fortune," not "Bankrupt Son Flees in Shame." I watched from the back seat of the black SUV. As we rolled up to the gate, the security guard, a man hired for the evening, who had no idea the property had already been foreclosed, waved us through the moment he saw the hood ornament on the Rolls-Royce. We moved past the long line of luxury cars sitting on the grass. I could see lights dancing off the fountain. I could make out the silhouettes of people moving through the windows. It looked like a castle. It felt like a tomb. Devin was out on the terrace with a microphone in his hand. He wore a white tuxedo jacket, reaching for a charisma that had never been his. Renata stood at his side in a shimmering silver dress that caught the light like chainmail. She was clenching her clutch so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I knew the reason. The tracker in the briefcase told us it was sitting inside the master bedroom closet, but she probably wished she had it pressed against her own body. I turned to Croft. "Ready for the show?" I asked. Croft straightened his cufflinks. He regarded the house with the cold, measured look of a man sizing up a structure before the wrecking ball swings. "I have been waiting 20 years to watch you take your gloves off, Clifford. I wouldn't miss this for anything in the world." We stepped out of the car. The night air was warm and thick with jasmine and expensive perfume. I buttoned my jacket. The weight of the moment settled across my shoulders like something solid. This wasn't a party crash. This was an eviction notice delivered by fate itself. I climbed the stone steps. The doorman moved to intercept us. "Sir, do you have an invitation?" he asked, planting himself in my path. I didn't slow down. I didn't look at him. "I own the pavement you're standing on," I said, my voice low and hard as iron. The doorman hesitated, thrown by the sheer certainty in my tone. Croft moved up alongside me and slipped a $100 bill into the man's pocket. "Valet the car," Croft said, "and keep the engine running." We passed through the open double doors. The foyer was packed. People laughed, drank, shouted to be heard over the music. The chandelier blazed overhead, scattering fractured light across the whole scene. I stepped into the room. Nobody noticed at first. To the crowd, we were just two more men in suits. But then a quiet began to ripple outward from where we stood. It moved from the doorway through the room in a slow, widening wave. The conversations died. The glasses stopped rising. Heads turned. They recognized Augustin Croft first. He was a figure of legend in these circles, a titan people feared before they even shook his hand. His presence alone was enough to drain the air from a room. But then they looked at me. They knew Clifford Nolan, the trucker. They knew Clifford Nolan, the haggard CEO in the rumpled suit who had stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty. They did not know this man. They did not know the man in the charcoal black bespoke suit jaw, clean-shaven eyes carrying the stillness of a predator. But they knew the ghost. "Is that Clifford?" someone whispered. I moved through the crowd. I didn't push. I didn't need to. People stepped aside, clearing a path, sensing the current of something dangerous coming off me. I walked at an even deliberate pace, my gaze fixed straight ahead on the terrace doors. Devin was still speaking. He hadn't registered the silence gathering inside. "It is a bittersweet moment." His voice came through the microphone, amplified out over the lawn. Selling the family business was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. The $2 million buyout allows Renata and me to pursue new philanthropic ventures in Europe. We are leaving the past behind. He lifted his glass for a toast. "The past has a way of catching up, Devin," I said. My voice was unamplified, but in the sudden hush that had fallen over the house, it reached all the way to the terrace. Devin froze. His glass came down. He squinted against the light spilling from the living room. Renata spun around, every trace of color leaving her face. I walked out onto the terrace. The guests outside went silent too, tracking the gaze of the people behind me. The music cut off sharply as the DJ understood that something was happening. "Dad," Devin stammered. He let out a laugh, short, high, unsteady. He swept his eyes over his guests, working to play it casual. "Look at this, everyone. It's my father. He must have caught wind of the party." He stepped toward me, smile stretched and false. He was moving to put himself between me and the microphone. He was trying to contain the damage before it spread. "Wow, Dad," he said, his voice dropping to a hiss as he closed the distance. "What are you doing here? You look different. Did you win a scratch-off ticket? You need to go. You are embarrassing me." I looked at him. I took in the sweat beading on his forehead. I saw the fear living behind his eyes. I said nothing. I walked past him. I lifted the microphone from his hand. He was too stunned to hold on. I turned to face the crowd. In the back, the reporters had their cameras up, every instinct telling them this was the story of the year. I saw the business rivals who had savored my fall. I saw Renata shaking by the railing. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was steady, measured, and unhurried. "Thank you all for coming." Devin lunged for my arm. Dad, give me that. You are drunk. Croft stepped forward. He laid a hand flat against Devon's chest. The gesture looked almost casual, but I knew Devon couldn't go anywhere. Stay put, son, Croft said. Hear your father out. I turned back to the crowd. My son tells you he sold the company, I said. He tells you he is bound for Europe with a fortune in hand. He tells you tonight is a celebration of fresh starts. I paused. I let the silence stretch until it pressed down on every person standing there. He is lying. A gasp moved through the crowd. Camera flashes erupted in sharp white bursts against the dark. Devon isn't leaving because he succeeded, I went on. He is leaving because he is running. He didn't sell the company, he surrendered it, and he didn't pay for this champagne. I did. Dad, stop it, Devon shouted. He tried to shoulder past Croft, but Croft held his ground like stone. You see, I continued, my voice climbing and finding its weight. My son told me not 1 week ago that I had no place in this house anymore. He told me to find myself somewhere else to be. He threw me out into the rain with $200 in my pocket. The crowd shifted. They turned to look at Devon's faces, registering something between shock and appetite. This was exactly the kind of dirty truth they had always wanted to see pulled into the open. So I took that advice, I said. I found somewhere else. I found a partner, and I found somewhere to put my money. I reached into my jacket and drew out a folded document. I held it up for all of them to see. This house, I said, holding that paper in the air. The house my son is standing in right now. The house where he is drinking my liquor and feeding you all lies. It entered foreclosure this morning. The bank unloaded the debt. I turned to face Devon directly. I held his eyes. They sold it to a company called Phoenix Holdings. Devon blinked. The expression on his face went from contempt to something less certain. So, what be, he said. I'll pay them. I have the money. I have the $2 million. The money you signed a confession to collect, I asked. The blood left Devon's face. You signed an affidavit admitting to negligence, I said. You admitted to slashing the maintenance budget. You admitted to the safety violations. You traded your freedom for that briefcase sitting upstairs. I looked back at the crowd. And Phoenix Holdings. I said, my voice rising until it rolled across that terrace like thunder. Phoenix Holdings is not some nameless, faceless corporation. Phoenix Holdings is the bird that climbs out of the ashes. I brought my finger to my own chest. I am Phoenix Holdings. The glass slipped from Devon's grip. It struck the stone patio and exploded. Champagne spread across his polished shoes in a dark stain. The sound of it was the period at the end of his story. I bought your debt, Devon, I said. I bought your loans. I bought your car notes. I own this house. I own the shirt sitting on your back. And I am putting you out, Renata screamed. It was a raw animal sound, rage and ruin colliding at once. You can't do this, she screamed, coming at me. We have the money. We have cash. You have marked bills, I said, my voice flat as slate. And you have a signed confession that is at this moment sitting on the district attorney's desk. The crowd broke apart. Pure chaos. Reporters firing questions into the air. Guests edging backward, distancing themselves from the wreckage before it could touch them. Security, I called out. The private team I had brought, men who had been holding position around the perimeter, moved on to the terrace. They had not been there to protect the party. They had been there to end it. Clear the house, I ordered. Everyone out. Now I turned back to Devon. He was standing there staring down at the shattered glass on the ground. He looked diminished. He looked hollowed out. He looked like a boy who had just understood that the thing he feared most under the bed was real, and it was wearing his father's face. Happy housewarming, son, I said quietly. Now get off my property. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor hard, the feedback tearing through the air like a dying siren's wail. I walked past him toward the interior of the house that was now at last truly mine. I didn't look back. There was no need. I already knew what was behind me, a ruin, and I had been the wrecking ball. I had not come here simply to destroy a party. I had come to destroy a life, and the screen behind me was a guillotine blade poised at the top of its arc. The crowd was still murmuring, a sea of bewildered faces bathed in the soft glow of the fairy lights threaded through the trees. They were watching me, the ghost who had just claimed ownership of the castle. They were watching Devon, the prince who had just been stripped of his crown. But the full truth was still coming. Look at the screen, I commanded. My voice carried no need to be raised. It bore the authority of someone who no longer had to perform power, only exercise it. I signaled the technician Croft had positioned inside the DJ booth. The music, which had faded to a low, anxious hum, died entirely. The large projection screen that Devin had erected to run a montage of his charitable works flickered. The image of Devin clasping hands with a senator vanished. Static replaced it then, a sharp high-definition video feed. The air went out of the terrace in one collective intake of breath. The footage showed a hotel room. It was the Ritz-Carlton. The timestamp in the corner was from 3 weeks ago. Seated on the plush velvet sofa were two faces the crowd recognized without difficulty: Renata Nolan and Dorian Page. They were not discussing legal strategy. They were tangled together, a sprawl of limbs and easy laughter. Dorian was pouring champagne. Renata wore a robe that hung open. The audio hit the lawn crisp and unmistakable. "He is so pathetic," Dorian's voice sneered from the speakers. "He actually believes he is running the company. I have to hold his hand just to get him to sign a check." Renata laughed on the screen. It was a cruel, hollow sound that bounced off the walls of the mansion. "I know," she said. "He is like a puppy, a stupid, loyal puppy. But once the auction money clears, we put him down. We take the cash to the Caymans, and I file the papers. I cannot wait to be rid of that last name. I hate the smell of diesel on him." I watched Devin. He was fixed on the screen, mouth hanging open. Every drop of color had left his face, leaving him like a wax figure softening in the heat. He stared at the footage, then turned his head slowly to look at Renata, standing just beside him. She had gone rigid. Her hand was pressed over her mouth, eyes wide and desperate. She wasn't looking at Devin. She was watching the guests, watching her place in this world dissolve in front of her in real time. But I wasn't finished. The video cut. The image on the screen shifted. Now it showed a document enlarged so that every line of fine print was visible to anyone on that terrace. The maintenance log for Unit 404, the truck that had left the road, the truck that had taken a man's life. A red laser pointer traced the critical line of text: emergency brake system override, authorization code BH77. And there at the bottom, magnified 10 times over, was the signature Devin Nolan. Then a second image appeared beside it. The photograph of the severed brake line, the clean diagonal, cut the evidence of something far worse than negligence. Then the audio played again. A phone call this time. Devin's voice unsteady and afraid. "Dorian, I did it. I cut the line, but the driver, he wasn't supposed to be on that route. What do I do?" And Dorian's voice smooth and unhurried. "You do nothing, Devin. We put it on the maintenance crew. We blame your father's lack of oversight. We bury it." The silence that fell over the terrace was total, the silence of people watching an execution from the front row. The reporters had stopped shooting photographs. They were recording now, their faces grave. This had stopped being gossip the moment that audio played. This was a crime scene. Devin stood before the city he had wanted to rule, stripped of everything. He had been exposed not merely as a failure, but as a cuckold, a thief, and a killer. He found my eyes. His own were begging me to shut it off, pull the plug, be his father one final time, and drag him back from the edge. I held his gaze. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn away. I let every pound of what he had done settle onto him. "You wanted to be the man of the house," I said, my voice barely above a murmur. "Now you are." It broke in an instant. The paralysis that had locked Devin in place shattered, and what replaced it was blind, animalistic rage. He let out a sound that didn't belong to a human being. It was the sound of something wounded and cornered with nowhere left to go. He didn't come for me. He spun toward the person nearest to him. He turned on Renata. "You knew," he screamed. "You knew everything." He lunged at her, his hands always so carefully groomed, so soft, curling into claws. He seized the fabric of her expensive silver dress and pulled. The sound of tearing silk cut through the quiet of the night like a blade. Renata shrieked, stumbling backward on her heels. She went down onto the stone patio, scrambling away from him, on her hands kicking up at him in a panic. "Get away from me!" she screamed. "You loser! You incompetent loser!" Devin threw himself on top of her. He wasn't striking her. He was grabbing her by the shoulders, shaking the truth loose from her body. "You laughed at me," he sobbed, his voice splintering into hysteria. "You laughed at me with him. I gave you everything. I sold my father for you." Dorian Page, who had been lurking near the buffet, trying to make himself invisible, decided this was his moment to vanish. He took in Devin, crumpled on the ground. He saw the crowd wheeling toward him with cold fury. He dropped his glass and ran. He sprinted for the side gate, his pricey Italian loafers, losing traction on the slick grass. The adrenaline of a coward who knows the walls are closing in put speed in his legs. He nearly cleared it. He reached the iron gate and his hand went for the latch. But Augustine Croft was already there. Maybe he was faster. Maybe he had simply read the play in advance. Croft emerged from the shadow of the hedgerow. No sprint, no rush. He just filled the space. He raised his mahogany cane with its brass handle and drove it hard against the gate, blocking the latch dead. "Off somewhere?" Counselor Croft asked. His voice was easy, even faintly entertained. "The evening's barely begun." Dorian skidded to a stop. He looked at Croft, then scanned the wall for a foothold. "Get out of my way, old man," he hissed. "Do you know who I am?" "I know precisely who you are," Croft said. "You're the man who's about to make me very famous for catching you." Dorian tried to bull past him. Croft didn't give an inch. He simply raised one arm, his hand locking onto Dorian's shoulder with a grip that had broken competitors for 40 years. He threw him back. Dorian stumbled and landed in a rosebush, shredding his suit and raking his face open. He scrambled upright, wild-eyed, and cornered between the billionaire and the advancing crowd. Back on the terrace, things had come completely apart. Guests were shrieking. Two of the waiters had waded in and dragged Devin off Renata. They held him by both arms as he kicked and spat. "She is a snake!" Devin screamed, tears cutting through the sweat and champagne on his face. "She planned all of it. It was her idea." Renata got to her feet. Her dress was destroyed. Her hair hung in tangles. She leveled a trembling finger at him. "You are the murderer," she shrieked. "I only spent the money. You cut the brakes. You killed that driver. Don't you dare try to hang that on me." It was a magnificent implosion. They were dismantling each other, shouting their crimes into the open air for every witness in the yard to absorb. I watched them. A deep, hollowing sadness moved through me. This was my family. This was the legacy I had constructed. A son who was a killer. A daughter-in-law who was a parasite. Then the sirens came. A low wail at first far off, then swelling a wall of sound bearing down fast. Blue and red light strobed through the trees, bouncing off the white columns of the mansion. The police had arrived. I had placed the call 10 minutes earlier, just before I took the microphone. Not to 911. I had called Sheriff Denton. Denton came through the front gate, a broad man wide as a barn door, his uniform carrying the grim dignity of someone who had looked at too much evil for too long. He had been my friend for 30 years. We had fished the same rivers. We had buried our wives in the same season. He had known Devin since the boy wore diapers. He walked onto the terrace with 4 deputies behind him, and the crowd split open to let him through. He took in the scene. He looked at Renata, trembling in her torn dress. He looked at Dorian, bleeding in the rosebush. He looked at Devin, restrained by the waiters. Then his eyes found mine. He gave one slow nod, a quiet acknowledgement of how much this was costing me and why it still had to be done. "Devin," Denton said. His voice carried weight. Devin stopped struggling. He looked at the sheriff. "Uncle Roy," he whispered the name he'd used since he was small. "Please, they're lying." Sheriff Denton didn't soften. He didn't offer comfort. He reached for the handcuffs on his belt and held them out. The metal caught the harsh light still pouring off the video screen, still cycling through Devin's confession on a loop. "You are under arrest, son," Denton said. "For what?" Devin asked, his voice barely holding together. Denton read the list. It was a long one. First-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, grand larceny, assault. Devin seemed to deflate where he stood. Every bit of fight drained out of him. He released the waiters. He turned around slowly, put his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the only sound that mattered. Denton turned to his deputies. "Grab the girl and the lawyer." 2 deputies moved on Renata. She bolted for the house, got maybe 3 steps, and they had her. The cuffs went on as she screamed. "I am the victim here," she yelled. "I am the victim." The other deputies moved on Dorian. He didn't run. He just stood there with his head down, broken by an old man with a cane. I watched as they were marched across the terrace. My son, my daughter-in-law, my attorney, paraded past every guest they had spent years trying to impress, walked past every camera lens. Devin looked at me as he passed. His eyes were wet. He mouthed the word, "Dad. Help me." I stood there in my charcoal black suit. I felt the knife in my pocket. I held the deed to the house in my hand. I looked at the boy I had raised, the boy I had sheltered from every storm his entire life. I didn't step forward. I didn't reach for my checkbook. I didn't dial a lawyer. I just stood there and let the moment be what it was. "You made your bed, son," I whispered, though the siren swallowed it whole. "Now you have to sleep in it." The police cars pulled away, their lights dissolving into the dark. The party was finished. Guests scattered, fleeing the wreckage. I was left alone on the terrace of my new house. The screen was still running, still showing the footage of the severed brake line. I signaled the technician to kill it. The darkness came back. Croft walked over. He handed me a glass of whiskey. "It is done," he said. I took the glass. I took a long pull. It burned on the way down. "It is done," I agreed. But as I looked out over the empty lawn, I understood that the hardest part was still ahead of me. I had destroyed the enemy. The enemy was my own blood. And now I had to learn to live alongside the ghosts. The visiting room at the county jail carried the smell of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies, a smell I knew from my early years hauling cargo out of detention facilities. Today, though, it smelled like something else. It smelled like victory. I sat on the metal stool spine, straight hands folded on the cold stainless steel ledge. I wore my slate gray three-piece suit. I looked like exactly what I was, the CEO of a company I had fought to reclaim. On the far side of the thick scratch plexiglass sat a man in an orange jumpsuit who looked like a stranger to me. Devin had shed 15 pounds in a month. His hair, which he usually kept shaped with expensive product, was greasy and matted flat against his skull. His skin had gone sallow, the color of old parchment. He didn't look at me right away. He studied the guards at the door. He stared at the cuffs chaining his wrist to the table. When he finally brought his eyes up to meet mine, what I saw there was not the arrogance from the mansion, not the pride. I saw a frightened child. He lifted the phone receiver. His hands were shaking badly enough that he nearly fumbled it. I picked up mine. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was cracked and hollow. "Dad, you came. I knew you'd come. You have to get me out of here." I looked at him. No smile, no frown. I simply watched him come undone. "It's a nightmare in here, Dad." Devin went on, the words tumbling out in a flood. "The food, the noise, I can't sleep. There are gangs in here. They know who I am. They know I have money, or they think I do. They threatened me in the showers. You have to post bail. The judge set it at $5 million. You have that kind of money now, I know you do." He stopped. He waited for me to reach for my checkbook. He waited for the rescue that had always materialized before. When I didn't move, his face caved in. He pressed himself closer to the glass, his breath clouding the surface. "It wasn't my fault," he sobbed. "It was Renata. She made me do it. She's a witch, Dad. She worked on me. She told me you were too old to run the company. She told me we deserved the money. I tried to stop her. I swear to God, I didn't want to cut those brake lines. She pushed me into it." She told him if he didn't go through with it, she'd walk out. "He did it for love," he said. "He did it because he was weak." The crying came in waves, now ugly heaving sobs that rolled through his whole body. He dragged his sleeve across his nose. "She played us both," he said. "She is the villain. I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. You can't leave me in here with these people. I am not like them. I am a Nolan." I listened to him lay the blame at the feet of the woman he had conspired with. I listened to him wield our family name like a get-out-of-jail-free card, the name I had carved out of nothing. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He wasn't sorry a driver was dead. He wasn't sorry he'd tried to bring me down. He was sorry the walls had closed in. He was sorry the bed he'd made turned out to be this cold. "You're right," I said into the receiver. My voice was flat, steady. "You are a Nolan, and that is the tragedy." Devin blinked. A flicker of hope crossed his face. "So you'll help me. You'll talk to the lawyers. We can put it all on Renata. She signed the receipt for the watch. We can say she forged my signature on the maintenance logs." Even in chains, he was working the angles. Even now, he was looking for someone to throw in front of the bus. "I'm not going to talk to the lawyers, Devin," I said. "And I'm not posting bail." His face collapsed. Why you have the money? You took my house. You took my company. You owe me this." "I took nothing," I said, my voice sharpening. "I reclaimed what was mine, and I don't owe you anything except the truth." I leaned forward until my face was close to the glass. "Do you know what I was doing at your age, Devin?" He shook his head, thrown by the turn. Dad, please, I don't need a history lesson right now. I was scrubbing floors, I said. I was 35 years old. I had one truck. It broke down every 100 miles. I couldn't pay a mechanic, so I fixed it myself in the rain and the snow on the shoulder of the highway, with cars blowing past at 80 miles an hour. I slept in the cab. I ate beans from a can. I washed my clothes in gas station sinks. Devin dropped his eyes. He had heard the story before. He had never once truly listened. I did that for 10 years, I went on. I swallowed my pride every single day. I let men insult me. I let banks laugh in my face. I gathered up the scraps they threw on the floor, and I built a ladder out of them. Do you know why? Devin said nothing. I did it so you wouldn't have to. I paused. I looked at your hands when you were a baby. They were so soft. I swore to myself those hands would never touch engine grease. I swore you would never have to beg another man for a job. I wanted to hand you the world on a silver platter. I stopped. There was a tightness in my throat. I pressed it back down. This wasn't the moment. And I succeeded, I said. I gave you the finest schools. I handed you an executive title. I gave you the house. I shielded you from every storm. I held the umbrella so you never felt a single drop of rain. I looked at him sitting hunched in that orange jumpsuit. But that was my mistake, I said quietly. I protected you from the struggle, from the very thing that turns a boy into a man. I thought I was raising a prince. What I was actually raising was a parasite. Dad, stop. His voice came out small. I raised a wolf, Devin, I said. I brought a wolf into my home and fed it from my own plate, but I never taught it how to hunt. I never taught it that meat doesn't just appear, it has to be earned. So when the wolf got hungry and didn't know how to hunt, it turned on the only thing within reach. It turned on the hand that had always fed it. It turned on me. You are that wolf. You bit me because it was easier than going out and taking on the world. You tried to destroy me because building your own kingdom was too hard. You wanted mine. I didn't want to kill you, Devin said, his voice barely there. I just wanted you to retire. You cut the brake lines. I said, my tone cutting clean through the glass. That is murder. That is the act of a coward who strikes from darkness. A man faces his enemy. A man says, I want your chair, and he fights for it in the open. A coward sabotages the machine and blames the mechanic. I stood up. The metal stool scraped hard against the floor, the sound bouncing off the bare walls. Devin shot to his feet, panic flooding back into him. Where are you going? You can't leave. I looked at him through the glass. He looked like a ghost, the ghost of the son I had once believed he could be. I'm leaving Devin, I said. I have a company to run. I have a legacy to rebuild, the one you tried to burn down. Dad, please! He slammed his palm against the plexiglass. The guard stepped in close, one hand landing on his shoulder. I am not your father anymore, I said. The father you knew died in the rain outside your door. I'm just the man who survived you. Devin was crying again, his face a wreck. You can't leave me in here. I'll die in this place. I'm not strong enough. Dyson gets strong, I said. Prison is your school now, Devin. It's the first place in your life where your last name counts for nothing. It's the first place my money can't reach you. You want to be a man, then survive. Stand on your own. Face what you did without hiding behind a woman or a lawyer or your father. I set the phone down. No! His voice came through the glass, muffled and desperate. Don't do this. I'm sorry. I'll sign anything. Just get me out. I looked at him one last time. I fixed his face in my memory, not the face of the executive, not the face of the man who ordered a driver's death, but the face of a boy who had gone wrong because I had made the road too smooth beneath his feet. I turned away. I walked to the heavy steel door. I heard him calling after me. Clifford, Clifford. He didn't say Dad. He understood he'd forfeited that. The guard buzzed the door. I stepped through. It clanged shut behind me, and the screaming stopped. The corridor was heavy with silence, but it was a clean silence. I walked the length of that hallway, each step even, and sure, I felt lighter. The weight of my son, the weight of his weakness had been set down. I had carried it for 35 years. Today I finally put it on the floor and walked away. I came out of the jail into hard, bright sunlight. Augustine Croft was standing by the car. He looked at me and didn't ask a word. He could read the answer in my face. It is done, I said. Croft nodded. He pulled the car door open. Let's go home, Clifford, he said. I got in. As we pulled away from the prison, I didn't look back. I looked forward at the city rising against the sky, at what was still ahead. Rebuilding from the ashes was going to take everything I had, but hard work had never frightened me. I was Clifford Nolan, and I was just getting started. The elevator doors to the executive suite of Nolan Logistics' executive office opened with a chime that rang like a bell calling the start of a new shift. I stepped onto the floor. It was quiet. The open plan office, normally alive with the noise of dispatchers and logistics coordinators, sat empty and still. Devin had cut half the staff to trim costs, and the other half had walked out in disgust. The air carried the smell of stale coffee and abandonment. I didn't linger over the vacant desks. I went straight to the CEO's office. The door stood open. The desk was buried under Devin's wreckage novelty paperweights, a mound of unopened mail, a half-empty bottle of scotch. It looked like something between a college dorm room and a salvage yard, not a command center. I picked up the bottle of scotch. It was expensive. I emptied it into the trash. Then I picked up the nameplate. Devin Nolan, CEO. I dropped it into the can on top of the liquor. I pressed the intercom on the desk phone. "Security," I said. "Yes, Mr. Nolan." The voice that came back was Pruitt's head of security, 15 years with me. Devin had pushed him to the night shift, but I had brought him back that morning. "And send in the cleaning crew," I said. "I want this office stripped. I want the paint changed. I want the carpet pulled up and replaced. I want every trace of the last 6 months wiped clean by tomorrow morning." "Yes, sir," Pruitt said. "And sir, welcome back." I didn't smile. There was no room for smiling. I had a company to bring back from the dead. I spent the next week living in that office, 18-hour days back to back. I called every vendor Devin had stiffed. I called every client he had driven away. I didn't make excuses. I made guarantees. I put the full weight of Phoenix Holdings behind every word. But the most important calls weren't to vendors or clients. They were to the people. I pulled the personnel files of everyone Devin had let go, the mechanics who could coax a transmission back to life with a wrench and sheer will, the drivers with spotless safety records until Devin pushed them to run overtime without pay, the dispatchers who had the city routes stored in their heads better than any GPS. I called them myself. "This is Clifford Nolan," I said each time. "I'm back at the desk. I need you." Some were angry, some were doubtful, but they all remembered who had signed their checks for 20 years. They remembered the Christmas bonuses. They remembered that I knew their children's names. They came back slowly at first, then all at once. They walked through the doors in their old uniforms, eyes cautious. But when they saw me on the floor, sleeves rolled to the elbow, going toe-to-toe with a supplier on the phone, they understood. The king was back, and this time, the kingdom would be built to last. I didn't just rebuild. I fortified. New oversight protocols. The yes-men and sycophants Devin had hired gone. A new board of directors assembled from people who could tell the difference between a balance sheet and a con. I turned Nolan Logistics into something leaner, sharper, and more profitable than it had ever been under my original watch. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about proof. Proof that you cannot kill a man who assembled himself out of nothing. You can drive him into the ground, but when he climbs back out, he builds higher walls. 6 months later, the company was posting record profits. The debt was cleared. The name was clean again. But sitting in my office staring at the black numbers on the ledger, I felt a hollowness settle in. The money was stacking up millions, and there was no one to leave it to. My son was in a cell. My wife was in the ground. The empire was intact, but it echoed. I kept thinking about the warehouse I had reclaimed, the one I had turned into a shelter. I went every Sunday. I saw the faces, men and women, who had been discarded, people who had worked hard and lost everything through no fault of their own. It struck me one afternoon, standing among them, I didn't need heirs of my blood. I needed heirs of my spirit. I called Croft. "I want to start a foundation," I said. He laughed on the other end. "You're going soft, Clifford." "No," I said. "I'm going strategic. I have capital. If I die, the state takes it, or worse, Devin gets out in 20 years and fights over it in court. I want to put it somewhere he can never lay a finger on." "What are you thinking?" Croft asked. "The Nolan Foundation," I said. "A venture capital fund. Not for Silicon Valley kids with polished slides and connections. For kids the way I was, kids from the South Side, kids with dirt under their nails and fire in their guts. Young black entrepreneurs who want to build real businesses, logistics, construction, manufacturing, the backbone of this country." Croft was quiet for a moment. "That is a considerable amount of risk, Clifford." "I built a fortune on risk," I said. I launched the foundation a month later. The criteria were demanding. I didn't want Ivy League credentials. I didn't want glossy pitch decks. I wanted character. I wanted grit. I conducted every finalist interview personally. One afternoon, a young man named Terrell walked into my office, 24 years old. The suit he had on was clearly secondhand, but it had been pressed razor sharp. He wanted to build a plumbing company. His business plan was written out by hand in a spiral notebook. "Why should I give you $100,000? Terrell?" I asked. He looked straight at me. Didn't flinch. "Because I am tired of being poor, sir, and I am the best plumber in my neighborhood. I just need a van and the tools. I don't need a handout. I need a start." I studied him. I saw the hunger. I saw the pride. I saw the young Clifford Nolan standing in the rain 40 years ago, certain of nothing, except that he would not quit. "I'm not going to give you $100,000, I said. Terrell's face dropped. He reached for his notebook to pack it up. "I'm going to give you $200,000, I said. "But I own 10%. And if you lie to me, if you cheat your customers, if you cut a single corner, I will crush you. Do we have a deal?" He stopped. He looked at me. A slow smile moved across his face. "Is deal," he said. I shook his hand. It was rough, calloused, the hand of a man who had already been working. Over the year that followed, I funded 50 companies, 50 young men and women who became my children in a way Devin never managed to be. I taught them how to read a contract. I taught them how to negotiate without blinking. I taught them that your word once given is the most valuable thing you own. They called me Mr. Nolan. They invited me to their grand openings. The Christmas cards they sent weren't out of obligation. They meant something. That was my legacy. Not built on bloodline, built on sweat and honor. I visited Devin once more in prison. I didn't go to the visiting room. I watched him from the observation deck while he was in the yard. He was alone on a bench. He looked older. He looked beaten down by something he couldn't charm or scheme his way through. He had made his choices. I had made mine. I turned around and left. I didn't look back. I had 50 other children who needed my attention. On the 1-year anniversary of the night I was thrown out, I drove the Rolls-Royce back up the driveway of my old house. I had purchased it back from Phoenix Holdings and moved back in. It was evening. The sun was going down, setting the sky ablaze in purple and gold. The air had a chill to it, but it wasn't raining. I climbed the stone steps. I stood on the porch where Devin had pressed that $200 into my hands. I looked at the spot where the money had fallen into the mud. Nothing there now but clean stone. I unlocked the heavy mahogany door and walked inside. The house was quiet. Renata's furniture was gone. The garish chandeliers gone. My things had come back, my books, my leather chairs, the faint smell of pipe tobacco drifting through the rooms. It was a big house for one man. Some might call it lonely. But moving through those rooms, I didn't feel lonely. I felt like I had won. I walked out to the back terrace. I poured a glass of good red wine. I settled into my favorite chair and looked out over the lawn. The city lights glittered in the distance. My trucks were out there on the highways, keeping the world moving. My protégés were out there building something that would outlast them. I was 72 years old. I had lost a son, but I had found myself. I had been stripped to nothing and left in the storm, and I had come back wearing armor. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted of earth and time and everything I had survived. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened a new message, scrolled to the contact, Augustine Croft. I typed, "I am sitting on my porch, Augie. The wine is good. The house is quiet." I paused. I looked out at the horizon. "You were right. The victory is sweet. But don't think I am retiring. I just saw a competitor trying to muscle into the West Side roots. I think I might buy him out tomorrow." I hit send. A moment later, the phone buzzed back. I expected nothing less. "Clifford, the game never ends." I smiled. I set the phone on the armrest. No, the game never ends. And as long as there was breath in my body, I intended to win. I raised my glass to the empty yard. "Here's to the rain," I whispered. "If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. That means more than I can properly say. This story cost me things I will never fully get back. A son I had poured 40 years into. A version of myself that still believed blood was enough to make a man loyal. I believe God does not strip those things away to be cruel. He strips them away because the life waiting on the other side of the loss is the one you were always supposed to be building. The reckoning was painful, but it was also clarifying in a way that nothing gentle ever could have been. If this family revenge story touched something in you, if you saw yourself or someone you love somewhere in Clifford's Walk, then take these lessons with you. Never build a man's character for him. You can give your children everything and still rob them of the one thing they need the chance to earn something. Protect them from the storm too long, and you raise someone who breaks the moment the rain comes. When betrayal comes from your own blood, do not let shame make you cover it. What you excuse today, you will pay for twice tomorrow. The people who call you family by name but would sell you for comfort, they show themselves eventually. Let them. Your job is not to force the truth out early. Your job is to be ready when it arrives. And for every adult's 50-plus man or woman who has been discarded by a child, a partner, a business partner, hear this: starting over at your age is not a punishment. It is evidence that you still have enough life left to matter. This has always been the heart of every real family revenge story worth telling. If something in Clifford's story moved, you leave a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who is carrying something heavy and wondering if they still have a fight left in them. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. Until next time, take care of yourself and hold on to your dignity. It's the one thing no one can take unless you hand it over.